It started like any other late-night Johnny Depp had learned to love. A battered guitar case in his back seat, the hum of old blues on the radio, and the city's neon glow flickering like an unfinished story outside his window. He wasn't drunk. God knows the headlines loved to twist it that way. The wild man legend, the rumors about bottles and breakdowns. But tonight, all he'd had was the clear high of being free, driving nowhere, alone but at peace. He pulled into a near-empty gas station on the outskirts of Sleepy Town, the kind where the local diners still sold stale coffee at 2 a.m. and bored cops hunted for anything to fill the hours. Johnny didn't mind. He liked the quiet. He stepped out, old boots crunching on the gravel, shaggy hair tucked under a worn cap. He looked like a traveling musician, maybe a drifter. That suited him fine. Inside, he paid for gas and a black coffee, nodding to the yawning clerk who barely looked up from his phone. When Johnny stepped back out, the cruiser was already pulling up behind his old Chevy. 2 officers, young, eager, and a little too hungry for a story. The taller one, name tag said Dixon, tapped the roof of Johnny's car with his flashlight. "Sir, you mind telling me what you're doing out here this time of night?" Johnny sipped his coffee, polite as ever. "Just filling up. Heading west." The second cop, Miller, barely older than 25, circled the front, peering through the windshield like Johnny might be hiding bodies under the dash. "You been drinking tonight, sir?" Johnny cracked half a smile. "Just coffee, officer." Dixon stepped closer, breath clouding the chill night air. "License and registration." Johnny handed them over without fuss. But the name didn't seem to click, or maybe they didn't care. To them, he was just a scruffy man with a guitar and tired eyes. Miller sniffed, glancing at the empty coffee cup. "You smell that?" Dixon leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Step out of the vehicle for me." Johnny's smile faded just a little. He'd dealt with paparazzi, scandal, slander. But this was different. This was 2 men too bored to see the truth. He stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. "Look, fellas." "Hands on the hood," Dixon barked. Johnny raised his palms slowly, an old reflex from years of dodging headlines and half-truths. He placed his hands on the cold metal, staring at his own reflection in the dusty paint. In that moment, he wondered how long it would take for them to realize who they'd just pressed into the hood of a beat-up Chevy at a forgotten gas station in nowhere, USA. He almost felt sorry for them. Johnny stayed still, palms pressed flat to the hood, the cold metal biting into his skin through the thin fabric of his shirt. Behind him, he heard Dixon mutter something to Miller, a sharp laugh, the unmistakable rustle of a bored power trip. "Been drinking, huh?" Miller drawled, as if Johnny hadn't answered that already. He leaned closer, sniffing the air like a bloodhound who'd found an excuse to bark. "Only coffee," Johnny said calmly. His voice didn't waver. It never did. Years in courtrooms, back rooms, late-night talk shows had trained him to stay steady even when the world turned sideways. Dixon patted his sides with a careless thoroughness, like he half hoped to find a hidden bottle tucked in Johnny's back pocket. "We got a real comedian here," he said to Miller, loud enough for the gas station clerk to hear through the glass door. Johnny turned his head slightly, catching Dixon's eye. "I'm not trying to be funny. I'd just like to get back on the road." Dixon ignored him. "You local?" "No," Johnny answered. "Just passing through." "That's the thing about drifters," Miller chimed in, pacing a slow circle around the car. "Never know what trouble they're carrying." Johnny almost laughed at that, the irony of it. If they only knew the storms he'd carried, the roles he'd buried himself in, the headlines, the half-truths that painted him mad, drunk, reckless. But here, at a no-name gas station, none of that mattered. Here, he was just a man who didn't look right to 2 bored boys with badges. Dixon stepped back, thumb hooked at his belt. "Field test," he said to Miller. Miller popped the trunk of their cruiser, pulling out a breathalyzer kit like a prize. He waved it at Johnny with a smirk. "Let's see how honest you really are." Johnny sighed, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his palm. "Gentlemen, I'm telling you." "Save it," Dixon snapped. "You got slurred speech. Unsteady. We got the right to check." Johnny almost smiled at that. Slurred speech. His voice was one thing he'd never lost. Not to rum, not to grief, not to the sharp knives of gossip columns. He took the mouthpiece, calm, steady, no fight. Blew when they told him to blow. Watched Miller's eyes flick to the little screen. confusion knitting his brow when the number flashed 0.0. Dixon frowned. Try again. Johnny spread his hands, half amused now. How many times you want me to breathe, officer? But the truth didn't matter to them yet. Because sometimes power needs to find guilt, even where none exists. And standing there, breath steaming in the cold, Johnny realized this story wouldn't end with a number on a screen. Not for them. Not for him. The little machine beeped again. Same result. 0. Clean. Sober as a saint under the flickering neon of a rundown gas station. But the two cops didn't look satisfied. They looked annoyed. The truth was an inconvenience they weren't ready to accept. Dixon snatched the device from Miller's hand, glaring at the screen like it might change its mind if he glared hard enough. Faulty piece of junk, he muttered. He jabbed a finger at Johnny. You got drugs on you? Pills? Anything you're not telling us? Johnny's brows lifted, just a fraction. No, sir. Nothing but coffee and an old guitar. Miller smirked. Yeah, and who plays guitar alone at 2 in the morning? Johnny let out a small, almost amused breath. Pirates, poets, old men who don't sleep. But he didn't say that. He just shrugged. Helped clear my head. Dixon leaned in, breath sour with cheap diner coffee. You think you're clever? Acting all calm. We deal with types like you all the time. Think they're above a night in the drunk tank. Johnny met his stare, unblinking. I'm not trying to be clever, officer. I'm trying to be on my way. Miller circled the Chevy again, this time opening the driver's side door without asking. He flicked his flashlight across the seats, rummaging through an old stack of CDs, dog-eared notebooks, a half-eaten bag of sunflower seeds. He popped the glove box like it was his own. Johnny stepped forward, but Dixon shoved him back toward the hood. Stay where you are. Dixon barked. You make a move, and you'll spend the night in cuffs. Johnny exhaled slowly, pressing his hands to the cold metal again. He'd known enough real cuffs in his life. On sets, on stages, in stories. But the click of real steel in the wrong hands had a sting no movie ever captured. Miller slammed the door shut, frustrated. Nothing but trash and old coffee receipts. Dixon shot Johnny a look dripping with disdain. Where's the stash, huh? You got something in your guitar case. Johnny's lips twitched. Just a guitar. Pop it open. Johnny held his gaze. Then, with a calm that seemed to grate on Dixon more than any smart remark could, he turned, walked to the back seat, and lifted the battered guitar case onto the roof. He flicked the latches. Inside, scratched wood, a few loose picks, a sheet of lyrics scribbled in his familiar sprawl. Nothing else. Miller peered over his partner's shoulder. Huh. Dixon slammed the case shut like it offended him. Smart man. Hiding it somewhere else. Johnny raised an eyebrow. Or maybe I'm just a man who's done nothing wrong. But that idea didn't fit the story they'd already written in their heads. Not tonight. Not for men who needed a win, no matter how small. In the distance, the gas station clerk lingered at the window, phone in hand, maybe recording, maybe just waiting for something to brag about later. Johnny wondered how long it would take for the truth to catch up to these two. He almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Johnny shut the guitar case with a soft click, the metal latches sounding louder than the night around them. Dixon stood close enough that Johnny could smell his cologne, something cheap and over-applied, like a boy trying too hard to smell like authority. Miller flicked his flashlight into Johnny's eyes. You ever been arrested before? He asked, like he was fishing for a confession he could cling to. Johnny blinked back the light calmly. I've been accused of a lot of things, he said, his voice easy but edged with an old, hidden tiredness. Doesn't mean any of them were true. Miller lowered the light, unimpressed. Smart mouth for a drifter. Dixon shifted his weight, his belt creaking. You got any idea what happens if we find out you're lying to us? Johnny gave him a long look. I think you two have already decided what you want to find. It hit Dixon the wrong way. Johnny could see in the flash of anger behind his eyes, the same look he'd seen on directors who didn't like being told no, on journalists who hated the truth more than a rumor. You think this is funny? Dixon hissed. We can haul you in right now for obstructing an investigation. Johnny arched a brow, calm as ever. What investigation is that? Dixon stepped closer. You think just because you look like some washed-up musician, you're gonna roll through our town in the middle of the night without questions? Johnny's mouth twitched. Washed up. He'd heard worse. Much worse. Miller glanced at his partner. uncertainty flickering for the first time. The breathalyzer had come up clean, the car was empty, but pride is a stubborn poison when it seeps into men with badges. Johnny could feel the shift. A sliver of fear, maybe, that they'd gone too far already to back off gracefully. And fear makes fools out of men faster than booze ever could. "Look, fellas," Johnny said softly, trying to toss them a lifeline they were too proud to grab. "Why don't we all calm down? You've got my ID, you've run my plates. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." But Dixon scoffed, shaking his head. "We'll decide what this needs to be." He stepped back, tugged his radio off his shoulder. Static crackled in the cold night. "Dispatch, we got a possible DUI suspect, non-compliant. Bringing him in." Johnny closed his eyes for a second, not in fear, but in quiet disbelief. He'd been mistaken for worse things in his life, but to be arrested for nothing more than not fitting into their small-town script, that was almost laughable. Behind the gas station window, the clerk's phone glowed brighter. Maybe a live stream, maybe just shaky footage for tomorrow's local gossip. Either way, a tiny truth was already seeping out. And Johnny knew, when the truth decided to wake up, these two would wish they'd seen it sooner. The cuffs clicked around Johnny's wrists with a finality that might have broken a lesser man's calm. Cold metal, snug but not cruel, more for show than necessity. He didn't fight it. He didn't pull away. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the worst punishment for a fool is letting him dig his own grave. Dixon guided him to the back seat of the cruiser like he was delivering a trophy. Miller lingered by the Chevy, giving Johnny's guitar case one last suspicious glance before slamming the door. Johnny sat in the back of the cruiser, hands resting awkwardly in the cold steel looped behind him. The plastic seat was cracked, faint smell of stale fast food and sweat clinging to the interior. Outside the window, the neon lights of the gas station flickered, half broken and buzzing. The engine rumbled to life. Dixon adjusted the rearview mirror just so he could see Johnny's face. He seemed disappointed that Johnny wasn't protesting, that he wasn't begging or raging. Silence robbed him of his small thrill. "You know," Dixon said over his shoulder, voice smug, "you'll sober up quick in a cell. Might even thank us in the morning." Johnny met his eyes in the mirror, calm, steady, almost kind. "You really believe I'm drunk?" Miller barked a humorless laugh from the passenger seat. "Doesn't matter what we believe. We've got probable cause. That's how the system works." Johnny leaned his head back, watching the streetlights blur past. "Not the system I know." Dixon snorted, flicking on the siren just to clear a red light no one else was waiting at. The town was dead quiet except for the wail of those blue lights painting empty store windows. "So what's your story?" Miller asked, twisting to half-face him. "Run away from something? Broke? Want a man? You look familiar, but I can't place it." Johnny almost laughed. You know, if you could place it, he thought. But fame, he'd learned, was funny like that. Invisible when you dressed it down, when you let your hair fall over your face, when you chose to slip through the world instead of strutting through it. "Just a guy with a guitar," Johnny said softly. Miller squinted. "You one of those washed-up 90s bands or something? You look like you used to be somebody." Johnny smiled at that. Small secret. Maybe I did. They pulled off the main road onto a side street that wound past closed storefronts and shuttered diners. Ahead, the tiny brick police station glowed under harsh floodlights. 2 squad cars were parked crooked by the door. Their kingdom, their rules. Johnny shifted in his seat, the cuffs biting a little tighter when he moved. He caught his reflection in the glass. Just a man, rumpled clothes, lined face, a glimmer in his eyes that said he knew something they didn't. Inside those thin walls, the clock was already ticking. A truth too big to stay buried was waiting for its moment. And when it came, the crash would echo far beyond this small-town squad room. Johnny sat on that hard bench, the cold from the concrete creeping up his back, while beyond the bars the murmur of hushed voices rose and fell like distant thunder. The sergeant's face had gone pale when he ran the ID through his terminal. Johnny had seen it before. That startled double take when a person realized the quiet man in front of them was someone they'd known all their life on screen, but never expected to see at arm's reach, cuffed like a criminal. He heard the low static of a phone call. The sergeant's voice, tense, drifting down the hall. "No, sir. I ran it 3 times. It's him, Johnny Depp. I know how it sounds." Dixon's bark cut in, angry and defensive. "It's a mistake." He was acting drunk, but the words rang hollow even to Miller, who'd gone quiet. The rookie's eyes darted to the cell, then away, like he suddenly wished he'd asked more questions back at that gas station. Johnny just sat still, breathing slow, almost meditative. He didn't want to ruin these men's lives. Not truly. He knew the world would do that part for him now. And yet, a small part of him wanted them to feel the press of dread he'd felt when the cuffs snapped shut. Outside, the gas station clerk's video, shaky, grainy, but clear enough, had already started to spread. The sergeant's desk phone wouldn't stop ringing. He heard snippets. "Yes, he's here." "No, we're handling it." But they weren't handling anything. They were losing control by the second. Johnny leaned forward, elbows on his knees, peering at the shadows flickering under the door. He could sense the shift, how a sleepy backwater station had turned into a matchstick dropped in dry grass. He wondered how long it would take for the fire to catch. The night outside the station windows was no longer empty. While Johnny sat in that stale concrete box, the parking lot had begun to bloom with headlights. First one car, then three, then half a dozen. Neighbors, curiosity seekers, and local reporters smelling a scandal before dawn. The station's aging fluorescent bulbs flickered nervously in the growing glow of phone screens and handheld cameras pressed to the glass. Inside, the sergeant's phone clattered back onto its cradle for the 5th time in 10 minutes. He ran a hand through thinning hair, pacing by the holding cell like a man watching a storm creep closer, powerless to stop it. He could feel Dixon's eyes boring into his back, arms crossed, jaw clenched tight around excuses that had started sounding empty, even to him. Johnny hadn't moved from the bench. He rested his wrists on his knees, rubbing the faint red marks the cuffs had left. He looked calm, but his mind flicked through memories, old junkets and red carpets, the polished handlers who built walls around him for moments like this. Moments when a mask slipped and the world saw the man, not the myth. But tonight, there were no handlers, no polished statements. Just him, a tired man in dusty boots and a flannel shirt, and 2 small-town cops about to realize they'd chosen the wrong stranger to humiliate. He heard the sergeant mutter to Dixon, low but sharp, "The mayor's office is calling. They want answers. They want you 2 out of sight." Dixon spat back, voice a hiss. "We didn't do anything wrong." He was suspicious. But even he couldn't finish the lie. The video said enough. No slurred speech, no staggering, just a calm man buying gas station coffee, while 2 uniforms puffed themselves up for the late shift. Johnny shifted, letting the bench creak under his weight. He caught the rookie, Miller, watching him through the bars. The kid's face was pale, eyes darting from Johnny to Dixon and back. Regret sat on his shoulders like an old coat 2 sizes too big. Johnny gave him the faintest nod. Not cruel, not smug, just real. Like he was letting the boy know he saw him, the way nobody probably had in a long time. Outside, a voice rose, a woman reporter, shouting questions through the glass. "Is it true Johnny Depp was arrested here? Why? Did you know who he was? Are there charges?" The sergeant's spine stiffened at every word. The walls felt thinner by the second. And through it all, Johnny sat, the ghost of a grin at the corner of his mouth. The walls of the small-town empire cracking, hairline to ruin. He knew by morning this town would remember his name longer than any mugshot they'd hoped to snap. By the time the first reporter slipped past the glass doors, a young guy in a windbreaker with a mic half hidden in his pocket, the station lobby had turned into something between a circus and a crime scene. Camera flashes popped like tiny fireworks. Someone's phone buzzed with an alert. Celebrity wrongfully arrested? The headline was already making its rounds before the truth had even been spoken aloud. Johnny could hear it all from the cell. The swirl of nervous chatter, the soft ding of phones recording, Dixon's voice cracking as he tried to shoo people out with half-hearted authority that nobody respected anymore. The sergeant stood stiff behind the desk, fielding the same question over and over. "Is it him? Did you arrest Johnny Depp?" Johnny shifted on the bench, leaning forward so his face caught the spill of hallway light. Through the bars, Miller hovered close now, keys jangling in his palm. The kid looked like he wanted to speak, but every time he opened his mouth, Dixon's glare pinned him silent. Finally, Johnny raised his eyes and fixed them on the rookie. "Miller, is it?" His voice was soft, but somehow cut through the hallway noise like a blade through paper. "How old are you, son?" Miller startled, fumbling his keys. 23, sir." Johnny let the "sir" hang in the stale air between them. "Plenty of time to figure out who you want to be. You know how you fix a mistake." Miller swallowed, glancing over his shoulder at Dixon, who was now barking at the reporter to get back outside. The kid squared his shoulders just a little. "You tell the truth," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Johnny's eyes warmed. The first genuine kindness he'd shown all night. "Good start." Behind them, the sergeant finally raised his voice to cut off Dixon's bluster. "Officer Miller, open that door. Now." Dixon spun around, fury blooming red in his neck. "He stays put. This is a misunderstanding. We'll clear it up." But the sergeant cut him off with a single look. The last shred of doubt had left his face. He knew what this was now. An embarrassment that would stain their department for years if they didn't own it. "Open it." The sergeant barked again. Miller stepped forward, fingers trembling as he slotted the key into the heavy lock. The bolt thunk back, louder than any shout. The door swung wide. Johnny rose slowly, brushing dust from his flannel sleeve. The press lights hit his face now, unmistakable, undeniable. The cameras caught the moment the world tilted back into balance. Behind him, Dixon looked like he'd swallowed glass. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. Johnny stepped past the threshold, a free man once more, not because he fought or threatened, but because the truth was too heavy to keep behind a locked door. As Johnny stepped out of the holding cell, the stale hallway air seemed to crack open with the buzz of a dozen questions. Phones lifted. Camera lights flared. In the swirl of noise, Johnny didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His face said enough. The sergeant moved to block the door behind him, barking at Dixon and Miller to stay put while he faced the tide of reporters seeping deeper into the lobby. But the crowd wasn't interested in the sergeant's stiff apologies. They only wanted him. A young woman shoved her phone forward, voice trembling with adrenaline. "Mr. Depp, is it true they arrested you without cause? Did they rough you up? Are you going to sue them?" Johnny turned to her, gaze calm but sharp under the bright overhead lights. "You all saw the video," he said, voice low but clear enough to quiet the buzzing crowd. "That's all the truth I need tonight." Another reporter shouted over the hum. "Are you pressing charges? Are you planning to take this to court?" Johnny flicked a look back at the sergeant, whose eyes darted to the floor, then at Dixon and Miller huddled by the wall like kids caught stealing candy. He exhaled, steady. "No lawsuits, no trial. But maybe they'll remember that a badge doesn't make you bigger than your neighbor." For a second, the room went still. No one expected him to let it go. But the grace in that choice, the lack of vengeance, hit harder than any lawyer's threat could. Behind the cameras, Dixon's face flushed red with shame and anger. His words died in his throat when the sergeant raised a hand. "Quiet." The kid, Miller, stood frozen behind them, fingers picking at the hem of his vest, eyes wide as if this moment might shape the rest of his life. Johnny turned back to the door. The press followed, shouting more questions, but he only paused once to glance over his shoulder at Miller. Their eyes met for a beat that said, "Tell the truth next time, even if it costs you." Outside, the cold night opened its arms again. The parking lot was now flooded with headlights and curious locals filming from their cars. Someone clapped quietly as Johnny stepped into the spill of streetlights. Not mockery, but respect, hesitant at first, and then louder as more people realized what they were witnessing. No drama, no shouting, just the quiet power of a man who refused to bend to small men's fear. And two officers left behind to taste the bitterness of their own reckless pride. The cold air bit at Johnny's skin, but he welcomed it. A reminder that freedom, even in the smallest things, felt sharper when you'd almost had it stolen. He stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching the crowd grow bolder. Reporters angled for a better shot. People rolled down car windows, voices whispering, "Is that really him?" Inside the station, the hum of panic buzzed louder than the overhead lights. Through the half-open door, Johnny saw Dixon pacing like a caged dog, barking protests at the sergeant, whose shoulders were stiff and squared, a man trying to hold back a tide already surging over his boots. Then headlights swept across the lot. A sleek black city car, not the usual squad cruiser. It pulled up slow and deliberate, engine purring like a big cat ready to strike. When the door opened, the noise on the sidewalk dipped to a hush. The chief stepped out. Tall, heavy-set, the kind of man whose presence made rookies snap straight whether they respected him or not. He didn't look at the reporters first. His eyes found the sergeant inside. Then Dixon and Miller huddled in the corner like two kids waiting to get grounded. When his gaze fell on Johnny, something flickered there. Recognition, disbelief, and an unspoken apology all tangled together. He crossed the lot in a few brisk strides, coat collar turned up against the chill. The press tried to push mics at him, but he cut through with a single raised hand. "Mr. Depp," the chief said, voice quiet but carrying in the night air. "I'm Chief O'Hara. I can't tell you how sorry I am about all this." Johnny gave him a nod, measured and calm. "Doesn't matter who I am, Chief. It shouldn't have happened to anyone." The chief's jaw tightened. He looked past Johnny, through the glass doors at his own men. "I know, and it won't stand." He turned to face the cameras now. No escaping it. Dixon's voice crackled from inside. It was routine. He failed to comply. But the chief's glare sliced through the excuses before they were fully formed. "Sergeant," O'Hara barked, "bring them out here." The sergeant obeyed, shoulders hunched like he'd aged 10 years in an hour. Dixon and Miller shuffled behind him, their uniforms suddenly looking too big for the men wearing them. The chief didn't look away from Johnny. "Would you like to speak?" he asked, voice so even it almost sounded gentle. Johnny shook his head. "No need. The world's listening already." Behind him, cell phones captured every breath, every nervous glance. By morning, millions would see how small men made a bigger mess than they could ever clean up. Johnny slipped his hands into his pockets, watching the first flakes of snow drift under the streetlight. Somewhere in the dark, a kid would watch this clip on their phone and learn that sometimes silence cuts deeper than any shouted revenge. Chief O'Hara stepped forward, the cold wind tugging at the brim of his hat as he faced the swarm of reporters now pressing closer, phones raised like hungry eyes. Dixon and Miller lingered a few paces behind him, stiff as statues, their uniforms suddenly looking like costumes they hadn't earned. The sergeant stood to the side, shoulders hunched, as if wishing the concrete floor would swallow him whole. But there was no way out now, not with the truth pulsing live through every camera lens pointed to the front steps. "Ladies and gentlemen," O'Hara began, voice steady, echoing across the parking lot now brimming with spectators. "I know you're here because of what you've seen online, the video, the accusations. Let's not dance around it. What happened tonight was wrong. There's no spin for it." A ripple of murmurs broke out. Dixon's jaw flexed like he wanted to spit back an excuse, but Johnny, standing quietly to the side, didn't even glance at him. His silence was heavier than any insult. O'Hara continued, eyes locked on the press. An innocent man was stopped and detained without just cause. Worse, he was treated with disrespect by officers trusted to serve this community. Not because he was drunk, not because he was causing trouble, but because they thought they could. A young reporter stepped forward. "Chief, did they know who he was when they arrested him?" The chief's lips tightened. "No, and that's not the point, is it? They didn't know, and they didn't care. It shouldn't matter if you're a movie star or a farmhand pumping gas. You deserve to be treated with respect. And tonight we failed." Dixon shifted beside Miller, his breath showing in the cold air. The rookie's face was pale, eyes flicking between Johnny and the chief, as if silently begging to be invisible. Johnny's eyes stayed fixed on Dixon now, calm but unwavering. He didn't need to raise his voice. His very presence was enough. "This is who you cuffed like a stray dog," that stare seemed to say. "This is who you mocked." A woman's voice called out from the back. "Will they be fired, Chief?" O'Hara paused, turning to look at the men behind him. Miller looked like he might melt into the steps. Dixon straightened, trying to salvage pride that no one was buying anymore. "That's up to the board," O'Hara said evenly. "But let me say this, trust is earned. And when you break it like this, you don't get to wear that badge just because you want to." The press cameras caught every twitch of Dixon's jaw as those words landed. No spin, no shield, no way out. Johnny gave a small nod, not triumphant, just final. The night was telling its own truth now, and every phone screen in that crowd was a witness. Above them, snow started drifting harder under the streetlights, soft flakes melting on shoulders, uniforms, and the hair of a man who'd walked out of cell freer than he'd ever been inside Hollywood's walls. The press conference broke apart like a cracked dam. Reporters scattered to beam the story to every glowing screen they could find. Some stayed behind, jostling closer to Dixon, shoving mics at his face as if they could squeeze a confession out of him with sheer noise. But Dixon, always quick with a bark when the badge made him feel untouchable, now looked cornered. The bright lights, the steady hum of live feeds, it made his excuses shrivel before they even left his mouth. It was a routine stop, he started, voice too tight, too defensive. He looked intoxicated. A sharp voice cut through the parking lot. But the clerk's footage shows him buying coffee, talking clear, walking straight. What did you see that we didn't, Officer Dixon? Dixon's eyes darted to Miller, who stood frozen behind the chief, shoulders hunched like he wanted to slip behind the station doors and disappear. For a second, Dixon's lips curled, ready to push blame where it wouldn't stick, but Miller's wide eyes stopped him. Johnny watched this unfold from a few steps back, arms folded across his chest, flannel sleeves tugged down against the cold. He wasn't smiling, not exactly, but there was a calm in him that made every frantic word Dixon threw into the night feel smaller, cheaper. The chief lifted a hand, cutting through the noise. "That's enough," he said, voice deep and final. "Officer Dixon, you'll have your chance to explain, but not here. Not now." Dixon opened his mouth, but the words dried up. He saw the looks in the crowd, the neighbors who'd known him since he was a kid running down Main Street, the same people now filming him with disappointment burning in their eyes. A team by the sidewalk muttered loud enough to be heard. "Hero, huh? Look at him now." His friends stifled laughs that weren't really laughs at all, more like small, sharp cuts. Johnny shifted his gaze to Miller. The kid looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Their eyes locked, and for a moment it was just the two of them in the noise, the old star and the young cop who hadn't known when to say stop. Johnny gave him the smallest nod, as if to say there's still time to stand up. Miller's jaw twitched. He dropped his eyes, then looked at Dixon, then back at Johnny, and took one quiet step forward. "Chief," Miller said, voice soft but clear enough to hush the edge of the crowd. I need to say something." Dixon's head whipped around, fury flashing like a blade. But it was too late. The chief leaned in, giving Miller his full attention. The cameras turned. The town held its breath. Johnny watched it all, feeling the shape of this ending forming in the dark. A truth that wouldn't stay hidden. Not this time. Miller's voice trembled at first, the words balancing on the edge of his tongue like they might tumble out wrong. But then he looked at Johnny, standing still and unbothered in the drifting snow, and he found the spine he hadn't known he had. "Chief," he said again, louder now, "I need to say what happened. All of it." Dixon hissed, low and vicious. "Shut your mouth, rookie." But the chief raised a hand that snapped the air like a slammed door. "Go on, Officer Miller." The reporters pressed closer, microphones hovering just inches from Miller's lips. The sergeant stayed frozen near the door, pale as the snow gathering on his shoulders. Dixon glared daggers, but it didn't matter now. The kid had chosen. Miller took a breath that seemed to drag months of regret up from his chest. It wasn't routine. We weren't looking for trouble, but his eyes darted to Dixon, then away. "Officer Dixon, he told me we'd pull someone over. Said the shift was too quiet. We saw Mr. Depp at the station, and he said it'd be easy to look good for the boss." The words landed like ice water on dry ground. Murmurs rolled through the parking lot. Phones pushed closer. Dixon barked a curse that cracked in the cold air, but no one stopped filming now. He wasn't drunk. Miller pressed on, voice steadier with every word. He wasn't acting strange. He just looked tired, like anyone late at night. But we did it anyway. I didn't stop him. I should have. Johnny didn't move. His eyes were soft, not angry. Like he'd seen this kid 100 times before in 100 different uniforms, caught between pride and the truth. Chief O'Hara let the silence sit. Then he turned to Dixon, who looked like he'd been stripped of every ounce of power he'd ever hidden behind that badge. "Anything you want to add, Officer Dixon?" The chief's voice could have frozen the asphalt. Dixon opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But the cameras saw it all, the way the lie stuck in his teeth while the rookie beside him laid it bare. Finally, Dixon spat at Miller's feet, muttering something about betrayal. But the word tasted bitter, even to him. Johnny shifted his weight, boots crunching on fresh snow. He met Miller's eyes one more time, a quiet nod that meant more than any headline would tomorrow. Inside the station, the phones were still ringing. But the real verdict had already landed. Not in a court, not behind closed doors, but here in the open night where the truth finally breathed. For a heartbeat, the world around them froze. Miller's confession hanging in the cold air like a flag nobody could pretend not to see. Dixon's mouth twitched as if he might lunge at the kid right there on the sidewalk, but the chief's presence pinned him in place like a nail through wood. Reporters pounced on the silence, shouting questions faster than Dixon could dodge them. Is it true you ordered a fake stop? Did you coerce your partner? Will you resign? Dixon lifted his chin, eyes darting from the chief to the cameras, his voice coiling like a snake. It's all lies. He's covering himself. He messed up the stop. He froze. It's on him. But no one was buying it. Not tonight. The gas station footage still looped on a dozen phones. Johnny's calm, patient posture, Dixon's puffed chest, Miller's uneasy glances at the ground. The proof had been there the whole time, waiting for someone to speak it out loud. Johnny stayed a few feet back, arms folded, watching the man who'd cuffed him try to crawl out of his own mess. He felt no rush of triumph, only a dull, human sadness that so many men made themselves smaller by pretending to be bigger. Chief O'Hara stepped forward, his shadow swallowing Dixon's smaller frame. Officer Dixon, you have a right to an internal hearing, and I promise you, you'll get one. But as of this moment, you're suspended, pending full investigation. Dixon let out a sharp, breathless laugh. Suspended? You're kidding me. For what? For doing my job. You think abusing power is your job. O'Hara's voice cracked like a branch snapping in winter frost. You embarrassed this department. You disrespected this town. You humiliated an innocent man because you thought nobody would care. Well, they do. And so do I. Dixon's face flushed red under the camera's cold lights. He spun on Miller, pointing a finger so close it nearly poked the kid's chest. You're dead in this uniform, rookie. Nobody's gonna back you up again. But Miller didn't shrink now. He straightened his shoulders, eyes steady. Then I'll wear a different uniform, one I don't have to lie for. A few in the crowd clapped, not loud, but enough that Dixon flinched as if struck. The same small-town faces that once smiled at him on Main Street now turned away, phones lifted to record every second of his unraveling. Johnny watched, then stepped closer, close enough that Dixon had to see him, really see him, not just the actor, but the man whose hands had been forced behind his back for no reason except another man's ego. Go home, son, Johnny said softly, voice so calm it made Dixon flinch again. Start over. Or don't. Up to you. And just like that, the power shifted, leaving Dixon standing alone under the streetlight's pale glow, the snow drifting down like ash from a fire long burned out. The chief stayed planted in front of the cameras, shoulders squared as if he could block the cold and the shame with his own broad frame. He didn't bother glancing at Dixon again. The man was finished, and the whole town could see it. Johnny stood to the side, watching the flashes pop, the mics float closer. He caught Miller's eye, just for a second, a silent good man that didn't need applause. The kid would carry that moment longer than any badge. Chief O'Hara cleared his throat, the steam of his breath mixing with the drifting snowflakes. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be clear, he said, voice heavy but steady. What happened tonight is not who we are, or who we want to be. One man's actions don't speak for the good men and women who put on this uniform the right way. He looked back at Dixon, who stood stiff near the squad car, face pale and fists jammed in his pockets, stripped of his false swagger under the weight of the truth. A couple of reporters drifted to him, but he shoved past them, mumbling something no mic caught. He climbed into his cruiser, or maybe for the last time his cruiser, and slammed the door hard enough to echo through the lot. The engine roared, tires bit into the snow, and then Dixon was gone into the dark he'd carved for himself. Johnny shifted closer to the chief now, folding his arms across his chest, his flannel spotted with wet snowflakes that melted on contact. For a second, he almost looked like any other tired man at the end of a long, disappointing night. You didn't have to come out here, Johnny said quietly. Only the closest reporters heard it. The ones close enough to see that under the bright lights, he wasn't just a movie star tonight. He was a man who'd come close to being another headline for all the wrong reasons. I did, O'Hara said, his voice low too, but firm. This town needed to hear it. From me. From the man it happened to. Johnny glanced at the cameras. He knew tomorrow every frame would be clipped and spun. He could bury them in lawsuits if he wanted, but he wouldn't. That wasn't how you really fix broken things. So he stepped forward, eyes scanning the small, curious crowd. Some filmed, some didn't. Some just watched, shivering under the falling snow. Look after each other, Johnny said, his voice carrying just enough to hush the restless mics. Next time you see something wrong, say something. Don't wait for the cameras to do it for you. He paused. A beat, a breath. Then, with a faint lift at the corner of his mouth. And if you want to see what happens next, stay curious. Stay kind. And maybe stick around. I might have more stories worth hearing. A ripple of quiet laughter, a soft clatter of phones as people lowered them, realizing they'd just been thanked for watching. The chief clapped Johnny gently on the shoulder, as if they were old friends parting ways at a crossroads. Only one of them could keep walking down. And just like that, the man they thought they could humiliate disappeared into the night, free, unbowed, and more real than any scandal could ever make him. The night wind chased the last flakes of snow around the parking lot as the headlights of Dixon's cruiser vanished into the dark. For a moment, it was just Johnny, Chief O'Hara, Miller, and the last ring of reporters trying to squeeze out one final quote before the cold sent them scurrying back to their news vans. Inside the station, the sergeant moved slowly from desk to desk, answering the phones that wouldn't stop ringing. Local talk radio, state news, even a late-night network anchor wanting a soundbite. He spoke low, choosing his words like someone picking through broken glass. Out by the steps, Miller stood awkwardly beside the chief. He kept glancing at Johnny, like he wanted to say sorry again, but Johnny only gave him that same calm nod, the kind that said you already did the right thing, kid. Don't waste it. The chief put a hand on Miller's shoulder. You did good tonight. Hard truth beats a pretty lie every time. Miller managed a crooked smile. Doesn't feel good. That's how you know it's honest, Johnny said, voice gentle but carrying enough to hush the last questions flickering between the press crew. Next time, you speak up sooner. Miller nodded. No more excuses in his eyes now. Just the quiet grit of someone who'd felt the cost of silence and wouldn't pay it again. A reporter called out, Mr. Depp, any last comment for the department? The crowd leaned closer, hoping for fire, hoping for revenge. But Johnny only looked at the chief, and then at Miller. Be better next time, he said. Simple. Final. He pulled up the collar of his coat, breath swirling into the cold night. No security detail, no limo waiting, just a battered old SUV idling at the curb, driven by a friend from the set who'd come as soon as the news hit Twitter. It felt right. Small, human, nothing flashy. Johnny turned back to the chief one last time. You'll take care of him? He asked, nodding at Miller. The chief's eyes softened. I'll do my best. The rest is up to him. Johnny chuckled under his breath. Ain't that the truth? He walked down the steps, boots crunching over the thin crust of snow, each step washing the stain of the cell behind him. No bitterness, no lawsuits, no headline that would make him a victim longer than he had to be. When he reached the SUV, he paused, one hand on the door, and glanced over his shoulder at the crowd still filming. Hey, he called, voice low but warm enough to cut the chill. If you're watching this, thanks for sticking around. Be kind to someone who can't pay you back. And if you want more stories like this one, you know what to do. A few people laughed, some cheered, the record buttons glowed red one last time. And then Johnny Depp slipped inside the truck and into the night, leaving behind a station that would never forget the lesson carved into its walls that winter. Morning came gray and raw, the kind that made every brick on Main Street look older than it was. The station lights still burned as Miller stepped out onto the icy sidewalk, uniform coat zipped tight, badge hanging heavier than ever on his chest. Behind him, the squad room was a quiet storm of paperwork and tense whispers. Dixon's name was already stripped off his locker. No ceremony, no goodbyes. A cardboard box of his things sat by the door, waiting to be hauled away by a man who'd once barked orders like he owned the building. Miller stood there for a long moment, watching his breath curl up into the thin winter air. His phone buzzed, a message from his sister 3 states away. Saw you on TV. Proud of you. Call me when you can." He pocketed it without answering, head down, boots crunching through last night's leftover snow as he crossed the street to the diner that opened before dawn. The bell over the door jingled like a gentle reminder that life goes on, scandal or not. Inside, folks were already talking. Johnny Depp's name floated through the air in half whispers and full laughs. An old farmer in a flannel coat muttered, "Did you see him just stand there like that? Cool as they come." His buddy replied, "Shame about that Dixon boy. Always thought he was too loud for his own good." Miller slid into a booth by the window, his reflection staring back at him through the frost-fogged glass. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a kid who just learned what kind of man he could be if he stopped ducking behind someone else's power. The waitress, Patty, topped off his mug without asking. "Heard you did the right thing," she said, her voice soft but proud. "Not easy, huh?" Miller shook his head. "No, ma'am." She squeezed his shoulder before moving on down the line of truckers and early risers. For a few minutes, Miller just sat there, hands wrapped around the warm cup, trying to figure out what came next. Across town, Dixon sat in a cheap motel room, staring at the TV, replaying his humiliation on loop. He told himself he'd sue, told himself he'd fight, but the phone stayed silent. No lawyer willing to touch a lost cause that smelled like pride and bad press. Somewhere far away, Johnny's SUV rumbled down a back road toward his next quiet stop. A movie set, maybe a friend's cabin, maybe nowhere at all. He'd left behind more than an overturned arrest. He'd cracked something open that wouldn't close the same way again. In this small town, folks would tell the story 1,000 times. Remember when they cuffed Johnny Depp? Remember when the rookie spoke up? And in a cold booth by the window, Officer Miller sipped his coffee, staring at his own reflection, realizing that maybe the badge didn't make the man. Maybe the man made the badge worth wearing. Out on the back roads, Johnny leaned his head against the cold window, the steady hum of the SUV's tires whispering beneath him. Dawn was just breaking, a pale ribbon of light rolling over the hills like a promise that last night's mess couldn't follow him forever. His friend Dave, an old stunt driver from one of his earliest films, glanced at him from the driver's seat. "You good, Johnny?" Johnny cracked a small smile, the kind that never quite reached both sides of his mouth. "Yeah, just tired. And thankful, I guess." Dave chuckled under his breath. "You sure have a talent for turning trouble into stories, man." Johnny didn't answer right away. He let the frost on the glass blur the tree line into soft shadows. Part of him wanted to be angry at Dixon, at the headlines that would spin his name into another tabloid hurricane. But he wasn't. Not really. Anger was easy. Staying human was harder, but worth it. Back in town, the diner bell jingled every time someone new came in with a fresh version of the story. Miller's name got mentioned more than once, usually with a nod of respect that tasted better than any apology. The kid didn't hide. He finished his coffee, left a good tip, and walked back across the street to face the shift waiting for him. Different now. He'd earned his own spine. Johnny's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. A new headline. Local rookie breaks blue wall. Johnny Depp wrongfully detained. He chuckled softly. They'd twist it every way they could, but the truth would stick because too many people had seen it unfold raw, without a script. Dave slowed as they rolled past an old roadside diner. "You want to stop? Get real breakfast." Johnny shook his head. "Not today. Too many eyes. Some stories need to end quiet." The tires rolled on, carrying him toward a place where nobody cared about cuffs or flashing lights. Just the next film, the next song, the next quiet good thing. As the sun finally slipped its fingers over the hills, Johnny pulled out his phone and tapped a quick note to his team. "No press war. Let breathe. People get it." Then he opened his camera, flipped it to face him, and hit record. Just his face, tired eyes, morning lines, honest and plain. "Hey, if you watched the whole mess, thank you. If you stood up for someone today, I'm proud of you. If you didn't, do it tomorrow. And if you want to hear what I don't say on camera, stick around. Stories don't end when the lights go out." He ended the clip with a soft grin, a promise, not a performance, and hit send. The road kept rolling. The story faded behind him, stitched forever into the town's memory. A lesson about power, truth, and what it means to stand up when your voice is all you've got. YW checkmark, thank you for reading to the end. If this story made you feel something real, like, comment, and subscribe for more untold stories that stay raw and true. See you in the next one.